And so the first two streams of programming that we got funding for, we were able to get support. So as a woman, there's Kay and Denise Andrea Campbell at the City of Toronto, right?
Okay.
And they really put hours and hours of work in and helped basically like, craft it, in the language that it needed to be crafted in, the proposal that is in the language it needed to be crafted in to get grant support and funding support from all these different sources. And, we were just pouring ideas and bouncing stuff back and forth. And eventually we got some funding. And the first two programs we opened was the recording arts, recording artists, producers, DJs, and engineers, and the art of business, the business of the music industry, the business of street fashion, the business of PR and events was the first streams. Eventually, we would go on to add the business of sports and athletics,
Yeah.
all things that you needed like passion, intelligence,
You
work ethic, but not necessarily a degree,
right.
to succeed in. And that's where we started. But the business was just as important as the recording arts to me
Of course.
because we knew that it's not going to be the first year or first 2 years that we're going to see a difference. But if we do this right, in the next 5 years, 10 years, we're going to see an industry.
You knew that.
We knew that. That was like, we were what, 23, 24 at the time
Yeah.
working on this. And that was the vision, like we weren't like teenagers anymore, but we were
Yep.
still very young.
Yep.
But we knew that was the vision. It was like, we're going to help build an industry and we need all the different components because we're pretty much in a blank landscape. Like there's individuals out there doing awesome stuff and
Yeah.
cool different movements, whether it's Jonathan Ramos or whether it was,
Right.
the Ivan Berries, whether it was the Monolith movement, whether it was, like Infinite and those guys and G7 and whatever. Of course, there was a bunch of movements,
Yeah.
but there wasn't a formal industry
Right.
that existed. And we wanted to help train and grow what would become a formal industry, and that's what we set out to do. And that's what we did, over the next 15 to 20 years.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
amazing,
And now
man.
you're seeing it. Like you're seeing, of course, there's the recording arts participants that everyone knows about, like there's the Jessie Reyez's, there's the WondaGurls, the Francis Scott Heats and Lou Callas and all these like amazing
Right.
people that have come out of this space. Or Raheem's, like the list goes on and on and
Yeah. Of
on.
course.
But there's also people in the business, there's folks working at that were working at Sony. There's folks working at Warner in marketing departments. There's A&Rs at Universal that have come from the program. There's A&R at Warner Chappelle, that have come from the program. There's people at Spotify,
Ricardo. Yeah.
Like obviously, yeah, Carla and Chantel are at
Yeah. Carlo.
Spotify.
That's right.
You know,
That's
um,
right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, both of them are over there. Ricardo's director A&R for Canada, I believe. I believe his director. It's either way, he's the main A&R for
Yeah.
Canada for Warner Chappelle at this point. He's killing it. Yeah, Jove was at Sony for a while. Jamal was at Warner for a while.
Yeah.
They've moved on to do really cool stuff in their own right. Like there's several people. Joel Naga helped launch the Amazon Music Canada side of things, right? Like, there's all these people that have gone on to make a dent in the music industry and bring relevance to these companies from,
Hmm.
like a legitimate kind of like lived it, been there, grew up within it type of perspective,
Yeah.
you know?
So how are you recognize opportunity and like you see the gaps?
Mhm.
Do you know what that's about when it comes to you? How you're able to identify those things? You're just very curious person, and not only that, you can also communicate effectively the barter system because that's how you told me about Remix
Right.
Project, and you said come through, and because when I did that music video, I'll
Mhm.
never forget. And this is why I give so much credit to you and Remix and Drex because it's an important part of Mad Ruck, an
Mhm.
important part of my career. But I remember outside you saying to me, why don't you, where do you operate out of? I'm like, oh, this is my mother's place. And you're like, why don't you come operate at a Remix? And in my head, I'm like, I can't pay rent. I'm like, and I was like, I can't afford that. You're like, nah, man, you come mentor some of the youth and we'll give you a space to operate out of. And you said to me, it's a barter system. Admittedly, at that time, I had no idea what a barter system meant. And I went and I looked it up right
Right.
away.
Right,
But I was
right,
like,
right.
you gave that space and Mad Rock operated out of there for 5 years until we were too big. And moved on, right,
Yeah,
to our
yeah,
own
yeah. Because
offices.
we wanted to have a video program, and we knew
Yeah,
how important music video was, to the
yeah,
ecosystem, but we didn't have someone that was able to dedicate their time to it,
yeah.
so it was like perfect fit. Like
So
let's
it's
just
just
figure it
it's
out.
out of necessity. This
It's
is all a
necessity, and
necessity.
then what can we do with the things around us?
Yeah.
It's the thing that my mom put into
It
my
all goes
head from
back full
day one.
circle.
You know what I mean? It's just
Crazy.
kind of like, okay, Gavin, what can you do with what's in front of you?
Right.
What can we make?
Yeah.
Look around.
Yeah. Now, all of these people went on to have amazing success stories, and now Remix Projects is still operating. It's like it's an institution of the city at this point in the country.
Absolutely. And what we're really proud of is like the alumni network and how the alumni network continues to pay it forward. And I mentioned how, you know, uh 40 and Future, and a couple of the other folks have done that in OVO, but like there's also a ton of other people like Jabril Jala, right? Like Fresh, like
Right.
he opens Get Fresh Company, he starts like selling Mitchell and S out the trunk, of his car and like jerseys and stuff when we met him, ends up becoming a stylist, like working with bossy girls, right?
That's
Like
right.
Caitlin and them, like
Yes.
doing assistant styling and then handling all the men's styling and then,
Yeah.
getting a storefront, doing his own styling business and getting a piece of a storefront, then opening his own bricks and mortar. And then years later, full circle moment, he's collaborating with his own brand, Get Fresh and Mitchell and S. Right. Like what a crazy full circle moment
Yeah,
from hustling it
absolutely.
out the trunk of your car to like
Yeah.
collaborating. But he would then open up the doors to all these other alumni that were coming out of the fashion program, out of the street fashion business program, and giving them their first pop up shop. Like being like, "Oh, you're from Remix? Cool. You can have a weekend to do a pop up out of my spot." Like, there's all these people that have gone on to pay it forward,
Yeah.
and what it's become, which again was fairly intentional, was like we don't have a fraternity and sorority system here like in America. Like
We don't.
we don't. And so
Not even in the
we
slightest.
wanted Remix to be the fraternity and the sorority for the streets. That
Great.
was part of the vision,
Okay.
and we say get money, make change. We say if you don't grind, you don't shine. But we always preface all of it with community over everything. And
Yes.
we really push that community over everything mentality. And I think people understand it because they live it while they're there and they see how not only do they feed into it, but it feeds into them and lifts them up. We always say, like, whether it's a sandwich or a record deal, like, you go to who you know first
Uh-huh.
to try and get that, you know what I mean? Or to figure it out. And so they really understand the value of community, how people's different skill sets contribute to their success and how they in turn contribute back. And it's that barter system. And that mentality has infused, I think, a sense of community across the greater Toronto area in a lot of respects, and has become that fraternity sorority where people are looking out for one another. And now, like, I love like when someone will be like, I'll be like, oh, they're Remix too, eh? Like when they're first meeting someone, like, oh yeah, what round are you? Like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm 8.0. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
oh
yeah.
shit, okay, yeah, I'm 16. Like, okay,
Yeah.
you a few years after me. Like, what are you doing now?
But
And then
still there's a camaraderie
there's a
there.
camaraderie right away.
Immediate.
You have a connection point, right?
Yeah. It's
Like,
true.
like we're tribal people. Human beings are tribal people, right?
Yeah.
We're looking for where we belong.
Yeah.
We're looking for where do we fit in. And when you can just give that signifier right there, it's like, you have the crest on without having the crest. You're like, oh, we're from the same tribe. Like, we're from the same peoples. Like, okay, cool. Like, I'm gonna look out for you. You're my
It's real
people.
shit.
Yeah, right. So
Yep.
they know that there's also someone's been vetted. They've had a similar experience, right? Like, I always say common sense isn't there's no such thing as common sense unless you've had a common experience, right? Like sometimes you're like, "Oh, it's common sense. How do you not know?" And it's like, "Well, because they don't know.
They don't know.
They haven't had the
Th
experience yet to create that common sense."
Exactly.
Right? So, you know that someone shares a common experience with you, so you're going to move a certain way. You're
Yep.
going to respond a certain way. You're going to reciprocate in a certain way. And so there's a bit of a vetting process that's been done as well. And so there's some trust that's been established because graduating from Remix means something. Not everyone graduates. Most people do,
Mhm.
but not everyone does. And
Mhm.
it's important that there's things you have to do to accomplish to get through. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything,
Doesn't mean anything.
right?
Yeah.
It's now there's 800 to 900 applicants for 45 spots. So people know
per
like
round.
per round. So 800, 900 people are applying, 45 are getting in. That means you're here for a reason,
Right.
like, and you have something to offer. And so people respect that,
Yeah.
and they open doors in kind, right?
How does somebody get into the program?
They go through an application process and then an interview process. So they apply online. At first, we were literally going to community centers and different non-traditional community leaders, aka rappers or OGs in the hood, and being like, "Yo, who is the young one that's like, put me on, put me on, put me on that you can't do shit for? Like, send them to us, you know."
Yeah.
And so they would fill it. We make them fill out application forms,
Yeah.
and online, and then then we do an interview, right? And then we do a second round interview, and then once you get in, you say, "This is like you're bringing to the table. This is what I've done. This is what I've accomplished." Because we're not a discovery place.
Right, right.
Remix is a now what?
Yeah.
It's you've discovered your passion, you're working on it, you're hitting glass ceilings, now what? That's what remix is. Remix is the now what. It's a professionalization space.
Do you talk about in this level of detail? I haven't seen anything online you talking about remix like this, or have you? Maybe.
Um, to some stuff, like I try to not repeat the same stories because I know which ones are out there, but there's always going to be some things that I repeat.